Welcome to Mormon Land, where we explore news in and about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm senior religion reporter Peggy Fletcher Stack. Joining me is senior managing editor David Noyce, who oversees our faith coverage. Hi, Dave.
Hello, Peggy.
Before we start, we remind you about another way to support Mormon Land. Just go to patreon.com, where with a donation as small as $3 a month, you can access transcripts to our podcasts, our complete newsletter, and all of our religion coverage. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Mormonland. And if you haven't already, follow us on Instagram at mormon.land. Now for today's episode. As practicing Latter-day Saints with nuanced faith, Valerie and Nathan Hamaker wanted to help fellow believers struggling with a faith crisis, or how they have been wounded by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So in 2022, Valerie, a mental health counselor in Kansas City, Missouri, and Nathan launched a podcast called Latter-day Struggles to address some of their issues and find peace. Their podcast drew wide appeal, but it also came to the attention of their local Latter-day Saint leaders. After numerous conversations, they say, those leaders summoned the couple to a disciplinary council. Rather than be formally tossed out of the church, the couple resigned their membership. Since news of their resignation became public, the Hamakers have heard from thousands of friends and supporters. Valerie and Nathan join us today from their home in Missouri to share their experience, their decision to exit the church, and what people get wrong and right about the latest developments. Welcome, Valerie and Nathan.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, to both of you, give our listeners a brief personal background, schooling, where you met, your family life, church, whatever you want to tell us about yourselves, your background.
Go first. Want me to?
Good.
Okay, so yes, I'm Valerie, born and raised in the Salt Lake City, Utah area, Centerville to be exact, since your listeners will probably be familiar. Nathan and I have been married for a long time, 25-ish years. Mm-hmm. And we have 4 children, 24, 22-year-old daughters, 19 and 17-year-old sons. The 19-year-old son is on a mission for the LDS Church in Modesto. And we met as missionaries for the church in the San Francisco, California mission in the mid-90s, and came home. Both of us graduated from BYU. I have two master's degrees, and the second one is in mental health counseling with a specialty in, I do marriage and couples work, and I have since really focused a lot in working with people with trauma, and started a private practice many years ago, and my youngest went to, I went back to graduate school, and my youngest went to kindergarten, and then I've been practicing for many years, and then transitioned over to Mormon faith crisis just a few years ago when I started seeing a need, because most of my clientele were LDS, and they were just in a lot of pain and struggling, and I wanted to help. So I think that kind of catches us up from my perspective. So,
yeah, I was born and raised in Houston, Texas. Went, like Valerie said, went to BYU, graduated in engineering, served a mission, met Valerie. We moved back to Texas after BYU, where I went to medical school at the University of Texas, and then we landed out here in Kansas City, where I was employed. I practice ophthalmology. And even though I'm not a mental health counselor, I went through a mental health crisis as well as a faith crisis. And Valerie feeds me lots and lots and lots of books to read. And so we have been able to go on this journey together. She, because she's professionally certified, and me, because I do what she tells me to do and read what she tells me to read. So,
yeah. He didn't used to, but now he's a pretty good student of the things I think are pretty cool. Then we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah,
so.
for the first 20 years of our marriage, I told her I never wanted to read another book again. I read plenty in med school. And now, of course, I can't put books down. We just love reading about faith expansion.
So you just said, Valerie, that before you started the podcast, and even then, many of your clients, do you call them clients or patients?
Clients. Mm-hmm.
Clients were Latter-day Saints, correct?
Most of my caseload has been Latter-day Saint. There are not a lot of mental health counselors in my demographic, and so when I graduated and started, I was heavily referred through LDS family services and whatnot. And yeah, I mean, that's actually one of the reasons why this became important to me. And I mean, I think Nathan and I really focus on this a lot in our current work. We do this because we have a profound loyalty and love for our faith and for our people. We really care about them, and because we care about them, I was starting to see patterns, and I was starting to see certain presentations of people in a lot of pain. And as much as I didn't want to admit it earlier in my faith journey, I could see that the trends were such that they were related to their faith. And so to me, it was the most ethical thing to do to address candidly and respectfully what is actually going on to help our people heal. And in so doing, to offer feedback publicly about what I think could help us all as a tradition understand ourselves better. So that's kind of what evoked my interest and my passion.
So Nathan and Valerie, this could be a question for both of you, but tell us, our listeners, a little bit about your podcast format and what kinds of issues do you discuss? Which ones come up the most? Theology, history, social issues, LGBTQ? What kind of issues have come up? Nathan, you want to start?
Sure. And all of that.
Yes, in other words. Yeah.
So it's really interesting. We read a lot. We have had our own personal experiences with issues, both ourselves, but also with our kids. And then, of course, with Valerie's counseling, she'll begin to pick up on patterns and come back and say to me, hey, I'm seeing a lot of, for instance, abuse and patriarchy. That's one that we've been focusing on lately. And so we'll start reading books, we'll start reading lectures. And like I said, she reads about 3 or 4 times more than I do. And if it's not on an audiobook, it's unlikely I'm going to read it anyway. But she'll feed me things to listen to. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. And we'll talk about it at dinner. We'll talk about it on a long drive to Colorado. And we'll put together just these maps of, oh, okay, so this leads to this and this led to that. And men are underdeveloped in patriarchy and women are abused, and then women turn around and abuse children, and we'll feed all this together. And after these hours and hours of conversations, we'll have a podcast born.
And so your podcast form is you talking about an issue? Do you take callers? Do you respond to questions? How does that work?
So the format is that what Nathan described is completely accurate. And also the way I kind of do it is I do one series with myself and Nathan, and then every other series is with a guest. And these guests are anything from theologians to scholars to experts in other experts in the field of psychology, or anything. Say I've had somebody on here who is an expert in development of human beings, and he's in the corporate world, but he's LDS, and so he comes and brings his expertise into how does this translate from from corporate America into what we see here in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so we kind of like to mix it up a lot. A lot of my audience just really loves the couple dynamic between myself and Nathan, but it's also really, really fun to have book authors and things like that. And the thing that I've noticed as this has developed is good psychology is also good theology. They map right on top of each other. And if people are healthy and are thriving, it's because they have integrated theology that is good for their souls. And so when somebody doesn't thrive psychologically, especially in a system that is so deeply integrated into their very being, like Mormonness is, you got to look at what is driving the struggle. And of course, it's not exclusively who they are in connection to their tradition, but it generally is a factor, because in our faith tradition, we are so deeply defined by our faith and by our beliefs and by our practices. It's just really prominent. And so I try to look at all of these facets of psychology, and we go into the theology to see, does this theology that we have learned and taken in, is it helpful? Does it help people thrive? Does it help the relationship? And then we do tackle issues that are challenging. And we both decided at the very beginning that we wanted to have integrity in the work that we did. And if it makes somebody not thrive, and I see it mapping onto theology, I will talk about it. And I'm going to be very respectful. But it is my way to sustain this system, is to say, if people are getting sick, then we need to talk about it, because we want to be instruments in God's hands. And again, we love our people. And so we're not going to shy away from or do only behind closed doors that which is healthy.
So, Valerie, as a therapist, I mean, it's my understanding that you can't really dictate what your clients should do about their crises, right? You can ask them, they can describe it, you can talk about what's healthy or less healthy. Is that right? And what do you do if people ask you, should I stay in the church or should I go? What do you do?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked it, because that is actually probably the driving force of where we find ourselves right now, because I, as a professional, was being put in a position consistently to where I was being instructed directly and otherwise that I needed to tell my people, my people on the podcast, who are not obviously my clients, but they do see and respect and are grateful for a psychological lens through which to look at their faith crisis. And I was basically I don't think it's too strong to say, I was being strong-armed to tell everybody to follow the prophet in public, even if they seemed to be okay if I practiced inside of what was comfortable for me as a mental health worker in private. And Nathan and I, we took exception to that. We did not feel like that was in high integrity. We felt as if, again, I learned this at church. I want to be a person of integrity, and I am going to do what I feel is healthy for the soul of the human being. And the spiritually healthy soul is also going to be relationally healthy. And so I will never tell somebody how to live their lives, what to practice, how to govern themselves, how to stay or whether to leave anything, a relationship, a church, or otherwise. And I actually think, if I were to say one of the reasons why I think the Latter-day Struggles platform is thriving, it's because we offer people their autonomy, and we trust them and help them learn how to trust themselves as spiritual beings. And they all know that they are trustworthy, and, well, they come to know, let's put it that way. They come to know that they are trustworthy, and when they work with me and with us, that we respect where they choose to go as they become healthy, whether it be affiliated and attending or distancing themselves or disaffiliating. And the beautiful thing is that in our communities that I form, I literally have people on the High Council and people who have been away from the church for 2 decades, and they love each other and they respect and honor one another's journeys, because that is the foundation of what healthy community looks like. And so it thrives because it's actually inviting people to be healthy.
So, Nathan, how do you see the podcast, say, relative to others that deal with faith crises, like, say, John Deline's Mormon Stories?
Yeah, so I'm probably not really qualified to comment on podcasts like Mormon Stories or others.
Okay.
I don't really. I have listened to some Mormon Stories. I have listened to Peter Bleakley's Mormon Civil Wars. And I have a personal relationship with Peter Bleakley. We talk offline all the time. I will say this. What we try to focus on is not what we're against. We try to focus on what we're for, what we would like to see happen. We're not trying to criticize or tear down or destroy anybody's faith or anybody's belief system, but rather focus on where do we go from here? Like, how can we be more inclusive of our women? How can we be more inclusive of our LGBTQ? How can we keep this younger generation in the church without pointing fingers or saying, gosh, we did all this wrong. But it's like, okay, what do we do from here? And that's how I think we try to, and again, I don't want to say differentiate, but I would say that is the lens through which we try to approach our work. And if I could add one thing to what Valerie said, if going back to Peggy's answer or question, Peggy, this is really important because it doesn't just affect us. It affects mental health professionals all throughout the church. Mental health professionals throughout the church are either leaving on their own accord or being driven out because leaders of the church are treating them as if they were supposed to be like bishops, telling people to, keep their covenants, obey the commandments, stay in their lines. And mental health professionals are not bishops. One of the leaders that interviewed us before we got our invitation to the court said to Valerie, look, show me a podcast where you tell people to stay in the church, and that will be very helpful. And Valerie said exactly what you asked, Peggy. I can't have a podcast that tells people to stay in the church. I don't have a podcast that tells people to leave the church. I have a podcast that presents the mental health issues, and I invite people to make that choice for themselves. And another leader said to her, in private, counsel people according to the practices and the best standards of your licensing, but in public, always say you support the prophet. And Valerie said, again, I can't do that. Mental health professionals cannot take biased stands. They have to practice according to what the science and the mental health shows. And so the leaders get very confused by this, I think. And I have grace for them because they haven't been through mental health training. In their minds, they don't know the difference between a spiritual guide and a mental health counselor. And so they see these mental health counselors and they think they're threatening the church. And so they're trying to drive them out. But they don't understand what the role of a mental health professional really is.
The role and best practices and standards and, things that are part of licensing, I would suppose, right? 100%. Yeah. Okay.
Something that is, I find ironic and maybe, one of the larger tragedies of this situation is that in this last week, the feedback that has been rolling in by the hundreds is from the demographic of our audience who actually have been able to maintain activity and a healthier relationship with the church because of our work. Now, we have people that become healthy and decide to distance themselves as well because I maintain equal opportunity. Like people can do, and I honor whatever their path is. The ones that are hurt by this recent situation are the very people who said, because of the work that you do, I have a healthy relationship with the church because I choose how I want to interface with it. I don't feel like a child in a relationship with sort of an authoritarian parent. I feel like an adult, and as an adult affiliating with the church, I do what actually resonates with me. And now they're seeing that they have been helped to stay in connection with something that matters to them. It's part of their family and their heritage and their identity. And the very people that gave them this ability or helped them sort of see a way to be in connection with something kind of on their own terms, we're being punished for something that has been very instrumental in helping them actually find peace in the faith.
30 minutes before we came on this interview, we just got a text from a friend of ours who's LDS, a non-traditional LDS person, but literally in our geographical area. And he said, I stayed in the church because of the two of you. I'm thinking now about going to a different church. And we get that all the time. And I wish our leaders would have thought through that.
We told them.
Before this.
We told them.
Because there are so many people. And look, I'm not saying that we're, saviors or prophets or anything like that. But literally just having honest conversations about these things keeps people close to the church in many cases. And now we're getting letters and texts saying, hey, I'm leaving the church in solidarity. And it's like, we don't. It's not what we wanted.
No, it's not. We don't want anyone to do anything based on us or passion or just anger. We want it. The whole point of what we do is helping people become psychologically healthy, which then allows them to make really informed, mature decisions for themselves. And it's been really heartbreaking for us that this week, the sense of betrayal that people feel because they love us and are grateful for us. It's both touching and it's kind of heartbreaking, because these well-intended gentlemen who are just about protecting the church, and I get that. I kind of think that in an effort to protect and defend, they were in over their heads, and not knowing how to handle us. It was just easier to make us go away.
Mormon Land will be right back.
So do you think, you've kind of answered it already, but is there any particular thing you said or did on the podcast that triggered this action, or was it kind of ongoing conversation?
I think it was fun to, I'll answer on that. You tell me if you have a different thought. Because a lot of people have asked us, I don't think it was one thing. I think it was an accumulation of our having a lot of independent thoughts and them not liking that, because we would move around. We didn't focus on any one thing, but like Nathan said a minute ago, we are not going to ever, we've never said something like, I don't know, women need to have the priesthood. That's never left my mouth. What we will do, however, is I will do a deep dive into what happens in a marriage that is born of inequality and what goes on there at all of the various levels of development. And so we never say these, the hard statements, but what we will do is we will walk people through the psychological and spiritual harm that comes of practices that are not good for the soul, good for the relationship, good for the growth of the human being. And then people, can sort of see that, and I've had many people say, I thought I was bad or wrong, and I've had these mental health issues, and I figured it was something wrong, and now I'm learning from you, and I have never been happier. I feel healthy. I've recognized that because I've learned these things about myself, I am thriving. And I think a lot of it is because they're understanding that some of the things that they were raised to believe to be sort of givens, just true, you can't question them, they're recognizing were not helpful to their growth and development. And so I think, to answer your question, I don't think it was one thing. It was simply that we are creating conversations around that which may be problematic, but also we spend a lot of time talking about other things that are just, good atonement theology and better ideas about a God that isn't angry and male and punitive. And we're trying to help people see more whole and more healthy ways of looking at every aspect of faith.
I'm going to turn to Jana Reese, Religion News Service columnist Jana Reese's story. And this may be for both of you, but several things jumped out at me in that story. And one of them is that you say your bishop refused to even conduct a temple recommend interview with you. Now, that, of course, is not standard procedure, we could say. Did he explain why? Was that startling to you, or was it the end of a long string of negative interactions or something?
No, it actually caught us by surprise a little bit. Yeah, we went into the bishop's office together to get a temple recommend interview. And he specifically cited a couple of podcasts that we had done talking about our concerns with the church's SEC scandal, and really what amounted to afterwards what we thought was kind of a lack of accountability, a pretty sorry letter that they wrote that it acknowledged guilt, but really wasn't like a true apology. And there were a lot of people that were hurt by that. And so we talked about that and said, if there were any other charity on the planet that had been caught lying and cheating and creating fake shell companies and et cetera, you wouldn't donate to that charity. And so we said in that podcast that Valerie and I believe that God's church is made up of all good organizations and all good people across the planet, and that at least for a while, until the church is more accountable, we choose to pay our tithing to other worthy organizations that are still blessing God's children in meaningful ways across the world. And that didn't sit well with our bishop, and he specifically cited that. And so when we kind of got the cold shoulder on this, Valerie specifically said to him, Bishop, your job is to ask the questions. We get to answer them according to our integrity and our relationship with God. But he really just couldn't. I mean, he got sweaty and red in the face and almost was like hyperventilating. And finally he said, we need to reconvene in a week. I need to think more about this. And then really nothing ever materialized after that.
Anything to add, Valerie, to that?
I think he did a great job. We did appeal to the stake president, who actually blessed the choice of the bishop and said, it's fine. You don't have to. And we said, this isn't even in the handbook that is so important to you. And it was such a strange irregularity that we never really overcame it, honestly. And it was a sticking point the whole time, because we had this kid coming up on a mission, and that was so important to us that we support our son. And also, from where we are in our faith development, we feel as if our relationship with a temple is ours. And it's not for an outside entity to dictate. And we certainly felt like God would want us to be there with our son, supporting him in this important rite of passage for him. But they were, I feel like in some ways, our poor priesthood leaders were just so flustered by us, because we were so independent thinking, and we were very kind and generous and tried to really work with them. But we were not willing to sort of lay down and comply with the demands that we stop speaking what was true and healthy. And I think this was one of the, I feel like it's possible that they were sensing that they didn't have a lot of, what am I trying to say, bargaining chips with us to motivate our behavior. And this was what they could do to encourage us to comply with what they wanted us to do. And we couldn't. So.
Well, and later in the process, when Lincoln did get his temple recommend, I went back to the stake presidency, and this was a different stake presidency, by the way. It had transitioned from these first conversations, and asked the same question. Said, I'd like to go through the temple with my son. And in addition to the tithing issue, which, by the way, I told him, I said, look, if that's the sticking point, I'll pay my tithing to the church. It's not that important to me, right? I'm not going to die on this hill.
But you never got a chance to answer the question
No.
in a temple recommend interview,
No,
right?
Because what ended up happening is when I went back in for a second interview with the new stake presidency saying I want a temple recommend interview, they said we can't because of tithing, because of your stance on women in the priesthood, and because of your stance on LGBTQ inclusion in the LDS Church. And so they cited those three things to me specifically. And I said, I'll pay the tithing to the church. And I said, look, reiterating what Valerie said, we've never said, President Nelson, by darn, change these rules in the church. What we've said is, as long as we continue to have policies that exclude women from leadership, that exclude our LGBTQ brothers and sisters from membership in the church, as long as we have those policies, these will be the mental health consequences of making those choices. But they see that as still being subversive. And so once again, I was denied a second time a chance to have an interview at the time Lincoln was about to go through the temple.
Okay, so Valerie, Nathan, let me ask another question. That once again from Jana's piece, which it can also be found at sltrib.com. We also talk about, you learned that some of your fellow congregants, I suppose ward members, apparently were behind the push for a disciplinary council. Why do you think they were, for lack of better words, siding against you? Were there exchanges that happened in classes or services? Were there disruptions in actual, in your actual Sunday interactions?
So this was so baffling to me. The short answer, at least from my perspective, is no. I was in the primary for many years, and just doing my own little thing. And so I guess I can't speak for Nathan and his behavior in the second hour. but we were just doing our thing. And I think my thought process is this. First of all, I want to protect some of the lovely people in my ward who have since come out of the woodwork this last week, and they're devastated with us. They're like, we did not know this was happening, and this is heartbreaking, and we are so sorry. And so there's that I want to make sure everybody, that I want to be fair, right? I think personally it has more to do with the fact that we have been in this warden stake for over 20 years, and we've served in all of the leadership callings, and I think people thought they had a known quantity before them, and then we grew and changed. And then I think we became scary and untrustworthy because I feel as if there's a probability that it felt almost like a betrayal, that like we were part of one cohort of people, very traditionally believing and devout, holding the callings and all of the things. And then we became scary to them in a way that would have been very different if we just moved in as we are. And so I think that might drive some of the fear, coupled with the fact that we are in Jackson County, Missouri, and there has been a steady stream of people in the last 2 decades that move here because they've been called of God to sort of usher in the second coming. And so I think there might be a little, I can't, prove this, but I think there might be something unique about this demographic that might be a little bit of a little sprinkle of extra zeal to protect the church from something that is scary and unknown and feels as if it's a threat. Like, we were considered amongst many people who honestly, I don't think they really spent very much time understanding the nature of our work. They just sort of assumed a lot of things based on, I would say, very little information.
Mm-hmm. So to be clear, because they feel they've been called to go to Jackson County, right? Okay. Hey, so Nathan, what about you as far as interactions with ward members and classes and stuff like that? Did anything actually surface publicly like that?
I mean, not that I'm aware of. Certainly nothing that created like a lot of contention. We were both fairly surprised when our bishop stood up in sacrament meeting and announced to the congregation, I know a lot of you are really concerned about the Hamakers, and many of you have come to me to talk about them in their podcast. And I just want to assure you, we've had multiple conversations, and I'm just like, these are conversations you're supposed to have when we're not present. These are like the ward council kinds of conversations that go on, not sacrament meeting conversations, Bishop. So yeah, we were made aware of it. At the same time, apparently 300 other people were made aware of it.
Hey, something else too. One time we were, I think it may have been tithing settlement, and I think he was trying to communicate his. I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt in like, why would have you said this? But I think it may have been to let us know that like he's on our team. But in so doing, said, tithing settlement this year has not been about tithing; it's been about the Hamakers. Half the families, that's all they want to talk. And I kind of looked at him like, oh my gosh! And I mean, it was that moment that was the first moment that I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I was in like enemy territory.
We're swimming among sharks.
I had no idea. I had no idea.
That sounds like a new question on the recommend list. I don't know. I didn't know that one existed. So
no, actually, it could be, right? Like, do you think your next door neighbors are worthy of a temple recommend Joneses? Yeah.
And we wouldn't know because we haven't actually been given the questions.
So I'm going to ask one more question. I mean, both of you, you explained in the piece with Jana and in other forums why you chose to resign rather than attend the hearing. But ultimately, it was your decision to resign. Is it correct to say you were forced out? I mean, why not make the leaders make that call?
Yeah. Can I?
Go ahead.
So it's a great question. For one thing, the leaders already had been given a chance to make that call. I had multiple meetings with both the bishop and the stake president where they said to me, we're just trying to learn your heart. We want to see where your heart is. We haven't made any decisions about a disciplinary council. And so Valerie had a meeting. I had a couple of meetings. We'd met with bishops. We'd met with the prior stake president. So for one thing, there was nothing left to discuss. There wasn't going to be a new piece of information. Valerie had sent them 15 or so testimonials from people in our groups who said they've helped us stay. We had a group member that knows personally a member of the stake presidency who made a personal phone call to talk about how our work had helped him because he has a LGBTQ child. We both brought live witnesses from our own wards when we met with them to have these discussions. And so, for one thing, there was nothing new to present. But the other thing for me is that we'd already been through 2 years of learning that our ward wanted us out, our bishop publicly humiliating us, a stake president who promised to help us and then didn't, and then another stake president who said he wanted to learn our hearts, which we bore to him, and then turned it into, but you don't follow the prophet. So it's not about the actual meeting that was supposed to be held in a week. It's about the whole process of feeling like we had been completely ignored. At least I felt like I had been completely ignored, and I didn't have anything new to say.
I felt that a couple of things. I felt strongly that it was an exploitation of power for them to be dictating for me how I was to practice my own profession. I never practiced against my ethics. I did not do it on church property. I did not do it on a Sunday morning at church. And furthermore, I couldn't tell them in enough different ways that what I was doing actually was serving the very church that they were trying to protect. And so that to me was problematic to stand before 15 men and try once again to explain, I am on your side, I care about this church. It is because I care about this church that I am doing this. I am serving our own people. I am serving a demographic that has yet to be served very effectively. You are serving a different demographic, and God bless you for that. Please keep doing that. If we can just respect one another in, each of our respective lanes, we will be fine. But there was nowhere to go on that, and there was nothing that would be accomplished in a court. And furthermore, I fundamentally have a problem with the idea of a court anyways. I feel like no ability to have counsel. They control who's in there. They control who can't be in there. Nothing can be recorded. Psychologically, it feels like spiritual abuse to me. And I feel like it was sort of you have crossed one too many lines. Now we are going to have one more opportunity to tell you that, or to listen, but then we would be colluding in a display of what I would consider unrighteous dominion had we shown up at that thing. Like that to me was saying, we give you the power to judge us, when Nathan and I quite frankly don't. We don't give them the power to judge us. We are grown, autonomous adults with relationships with God, with integrity, and we are going to do that which feels as if is best for ourselves, for the people we serve, and aligned with our relationship with God. And that's why, to me, I was like, we're not going to put them in a position to sin against us. Even though they're trying their hardest and doing their best, it is a situation that is not good for their souls any more than it's good for ours.
So a couple of last questions. One is, it does appear that your issues are mainly rooted in your local leaders, correct?
To our understanding, I mean, we can't really know that. I know a lot of people this week have been challenging that, saying, no, there's no way you aren't, you don't have a special file. And, my response is, well, I would hope so. I mean, yeah. I feel like I'm doing good work, but no, I'm just kidding. I don't know. We have no idea.
We've asked that question and they've said no, but I mean.
So my question to you is, if these men are replaced by other men in more open-minded men in the future, would you think about coming back?
That's a great question. I'll answer for myself, and the answer is yes. I love the church. There are things about the church that I really love. We have all of our families on both sides are still very active in the church, at least for the time being. There's going to be some weddings and some other things we're not going to get to participate in. If we found ourselves in an environment where there were people who were more understanding and would look at us and say, yeah, I don't think that you've committed apostasy, I personally would consider coming back.
And I think I would too, if I was allowed to live in my integrity. I refuse to enter back into a situation where I feel as if I am being censored or edited, because what I do and who I am and how I serve God is very important to me, and I will not put myself in a position to where someone can tell me who I need to be and how I need to be in relationship with God. And so if we can come into a place where everyone will, who matters is respectful of that, and I can be fully who I am, then I will. And if that doesn't happen, the fact of the matter is I am a Mormon in my DNA, and I don't feel very different. Just because somebody pushed a button in South Temple, that really doesn't actually change very much about who I am, what I stand for, and how I see myself in the world.
Anything else you want to tell our listeners about your situation, your faith, your future?
I would just say, for my part, I've been overwhelmed with gratitude and love for the thousands of people who have reached out this week and shared with us the impact that our work has had. And it means a lot to me because, one does put oneself on the line in this tradition to say things out loud. And I committed to this potential the very first time I dropped a podcast, knowing this was a possibility, and because it felt like the right thing to do. And I still feel that way, and I have no plans to stop. And I am looking forward to being able to move forward in my full integrity and feeling as if I don't have to look over my shoulder and worry that somebody is, not approving of me over who, somebody who has power to try to hurt me. They can't do that anymore. Anything you want?
Do you have anything?
I would just add that for me personally, the journey has brought me to know myself better and God better, and I see the world so differently now. I see it through the eyes of love, where I used to see through the eyes of fear. And I really like being able to share that with people. Like, I'm not afraid, right? They can burn me at the stake. They can drive me out. They can shoot at me. They can bring their muskets or whatever analogies they want to use. And they can't hurt me anymore, right? Because I know who I am, and I know who God is, and I know who the people of this church are, what they're capable of finding in their own souls. And those who have been marginalized, those who have been pushed out, our Black brothers and sisters, our women, our LGBTQ, our Native Americans, all of these brothers and sisters who have been marginalized by a well-meaning but very human church, we all are coming to know who we are in God, that we are good and we are loved, and that it's a God of love, not a God of fear. And so whether it's in the church or out of the church, the message is the same. We're not angry. We're not hateful. We don't want to see the church burn to the ground. Even from the outside of the church, I want it to thrive. I've got a son on a mission, for crying out loud. We want the church to do well. We love the church. We love our local church leaders. We know they don't understand, but that's not a character flaw in them. It's just different life's experiences. So I want people to know that I'm still very, very positive.
Yeah, and we do. We care about, this is why we do it, and we want the church to thrive. And I think that's surprised some people that we aren't more upset, but we feel very peaceful because this whole journey has taught us how to know ourselves and not really feel like we need the validation of either priesthood leaders or the church itself, because we have it, it begins at home, and we find that in ourselves. And that's what we're teaching our people that we work with, which I think is why they're thriving too.
The name of the podcast is Latter-day Struggles. Valerie and Nathan, thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks for having us.
Sharing your faith and your journey.
Our pleasure.
Thanks to Dave Noyce.
Always a pleasure.
And to our producer, Chris Samuels, we remind our listeners they can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com to sign up, and we'll talk again next time on Mormon Land.